Welcome to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, May 9th, 2021, and we are live. Hope everybody's doing well. It's Mother's Day, so happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there, and especially happy Mother's Day to my mom as well. So on today's show, well, look, this past week has been a very, very busy week. We know this past Monday, May 3rd, I was not on the air live. I was a panelist once again on the Tammy Mack Late Show on Fox Soul TV. In that video, a lot of people, tens of thousands of people have been watching that video. I was on the show with Dr. Umar Johnson and Reverend Jesse Lee Peterson. And we discussed what constitutes a sellout in the Black community. And it's a very, very interesting conversation. So on tomorrow's show, we'll share some excerpts of that. And then on Friday, this past Friday, I was a panelist once again on Roland Martin Unfiltered. So we'll share some excerpts from Roland Martin Unfiltered on our Monday show. But Thursday, I did an interview with Dr. Daryl Scott, history professor from Howard University, and we talked about the 13th Amendment. We talked about what Ava DuVernay's documentary 13th got wrong about history and the 13th Amendment, and the myth of the relationship between the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and mass incarceration, the myth that the 13th Amendment re-enslaved African Americans, leading to mass incarceration. So later in today's show, we'll share an excerpt of that interview. Okay. And then we're going to deal some with the history of Mother's Day. Now, Mother's Day has a very, very interesting history because the woman who really spearheaded Mother's Day, Anna Jarvis, in 1908, she would later grow to hate the holiday that she created and worked to have it removed from the calendar. She denounced it later in life. So we'll talk some about Mother's Day history and why did the woman who created the holiday later denounce it. Now, we also know that this past week was Cinco de Mayo, May 5th, okay? And May 5th is not Mexico's Independence Day. May 5th deals with a smaller battle in 1862 dealing with the Mexicans against the French army. Okay, so but there's a Cinco de Mayo also ties into anti-slavery history as well. So we'll talk about Cinco de Mayo and the forgotten anti-slavery history. Cinco de Mayo and the forgotten anti-slavery history. We'll talk a little bit about that on today's show as well. Now, I was watching the, now speaking of slavery also, because see, all this ties together. This is history in the headlines. We saw it this past week also dealing with the attack on critical race theory, as well as the attack on the 1619 Project, even though there are some flaws in the 1619 Project. And I talked with Dr. Daryl Scott about that as well. But we've seen attacks from Senator Mitch McConnell and other Republicans. They don't want federal grant money to go towards any school districts using the 1619 Project, things like this. Speaking of Mitch McConnell and slavery, I posted this article back in 2019 when it came out. And the article resurfaced again. Tiffany Cross on Cross Connection on MSNBC talked about this in a story on Saturday. But you remember back in 2019, around the time of the reparations hearing in the House of Representatives that took place June 19th, 2019. That was Juneteenth, okay? And this coincided with the 400th year anniversary of August 20th, 1619 in Virginia, okay? When 29 Africans on the White Lion pirate ship were exchanged for food and water supplies. Well, some people may have forgotten. There was a big article from uh, NBC News back in July 8th, 2019. Senator Mitch McConnell's great great grandfathers owned 14 slaves, bringing reparations issue close to home. Because see, Moscow Mitch, the Grim Reaper, Mitch better have my money. He's against reparations. But when you go research this, his family benefited from slavery. His family got a leg up in life from slavery. But he's against trying to compensate the descendants of those who were exploited. But he and his family and his ancestors profited from the exploitation. Then Moscow Mitch then attacks the 1619 Project. And we talked about this past week on our shows this past week, where a lot of people dealing with a bunch of gossip and all types of BS like that. There's an article from CNN that we discussed and others dealing with this topic. McConnell sends a letter to Education Secretary demanding removal of the 1619 Project from federal grant programs. Senator Moscow Mitch McConnell, whose family benefited from the enslavement of African people, he sent a letter, and it was sponsored by about 36 other Republicans. Sent a letter to Miguel Cardona, the new Secretary of Education, demanding removal of the 1619 Project from federal grant programs. So you have to sit back and ask the question: what are they afraid of? Are they afraid that we're going to find out how many of them profited from enslaving our ancestors and selling us and denying us our rights? Then at the same time, many of them are lying, saying that Donald Trump won the presidential election, and they're supporting voter restriction bills, 361 in state legislatures across the country. Many of these Republicans are against strengthening the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Many of them are against the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, things like this. So you have to sit back and start connecting all these dots. Now, another dot that has to be connected is what happened in the Texas state legislature on Friday. Now, on the Rachel Maddow show on Friday, that was Friday, May 7th, she did this story, and we posted. I was reading an article also from NBC News, and I think we talked about this on Roland Martin Unfiltered on Friday, dealing with the Texas state legislature. Texas House passes restrictive election bill after Democrats all-night fight. Texas House Representatives passes restrictive election bill after Democrats all-night fight. And this is part of those 361 bills, a solution searching for a problem. But in during the course of the debate, it came up about a particular clause that was in the voter restriction bill. And this clause is purity of the ballot box. Purity of the ballot box. Now, there's a big article from the Washington Post dealing with this. And you had State Representative Raphael Anchia, Democrat from Texas, who called out Representative Briscoe Cain, Republican. Briscoe Cain looks like he's about in 8th grade, 9th grade, something like that. But all this ties into history. And purity of the ballot box was a phrase used in the Texas state constitution to have all white primaries. All white primaries in Texas where only white people can vote and African Americans were disenfranchised. Washington Post has this article from May 9th, 2021. A Texas bill drew ire for saying it would preserve purity of the ballot box. And then it breaks down the history of this phrase. We're going to talk about this because this ties right into history. But history puts you on a trajectory of the future. And then when little Briscoe Kane used the term purity of the ballot box, and State Representative Raphael Anchia questions him on his understanding of Texas history, Briscoe was clueless. Just this past week in the state legislature in Tennessee, you had Jeff Lafferty, Texas, Tennessee state representative, who gave this long explanation of the 3/5 clause of 1787, Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution, the 3/5 clause, and he didn't have any clue what he was talking about. He said something to the effect that the 3/5 clause laid the foundation to abolish slavery. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. America needs a massive history lesson. Americans are very ignorant of history. Not only that, many people in state legislatures writing laws that impact people in the state, many people in the U.S. House of Representatives and U.S. Senate who write laws that impact 330 million Americans, many of them are very ignorant of history. We're seeing this play out over the past couple of weeks. It continues. So we'll deal with this on the other side of the break. And this is why elections have consequences. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. Politics impacts every aspect of our lives, from the water we drink to the air we breathe to the food we eat, to what the minimum wage is, to the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. So we'll deal with all this on the other side of the break. You listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. All right, stand by, everybody. Everybody share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in also. Stand by. Okay. How's everybody doing? All right, now you all can still register for the online course that I teach. We just had a new section that started up on Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa. Understand the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So we deal with thousands of years of history and what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. We'll post a link here also. All right, stand by. Back from break in 3 minutes. Our next class is Saturday, May 15th. As soon as you register, you can watch the class we just did this past Saturday. We record all the courses. We do them live and record all of them. All the classes are recorded, so you can go back and watch them over and over again. Stand back. We're back from break in 2 minutes. All right. Stand by. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, May 9th, 2021. And we're live. Hope everybody's doing well. Calling number is 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the calling number if you have a question or comment. All right. I want to remind you that you can, we have a new section of my online class that started up. Is on Saturdays. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa. understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. We deal with thousands of years of history and what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Okay. It meets on Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We just posted the link here. So we deal with ancient Africa, ancient Egypt, Nubia, Ta-Nehisi. We deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. And they take the teachings from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt into Europe. And this brings Europe out of the Dark Ages. And then we deal with what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Okay, so the class is regularly $130, on sale $80. We do it on Saturdays. We do the class live, and then all the sessions are recorded. All the sessions are recorded, so you can go back and watch it over and over again. You can watch from around the world. You'll still have access to the class even after the course is over with. So you can visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can register there. We just posted the link also. As soon as you register, you can start watching the content, and you can watch the class that we just did Saturday. Next class is Saturday, May 15th, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right. Now, on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects your own behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man or woman's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his or her actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. So we deal with a number of different topics here on the African History Network show. We do a current events in history, politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, love, sex, health issues, and relationships. I keep forgetting relationships sometimes. Relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, Kemet, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, Kemet, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Also visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And you can support the African History Network as well. $ the AHN show through Cash App. $ the AHN show through Cash App. Also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. All right. So, and then when you do it through Cash App, be sure to type in $ the AHN show, SHOW, and there's a show, my name, it'll say Michael, and show my picture there. Okay. So when we look at the history of Mother's Day, Mother's Day has a very, very interesting history. Now, I'm not against celebrating Mother's Day. Now, most of the European holidays I don't celebrate, and I encourage people to read the book by Dr. Ishaka Musa Barashango, African People and European Holidays and Mental Genocide, book 1 and book 2. This is book 1 right here. I have book 2 here also somewhere. African People and European Holidays and Mental Genocide. And I think it's important to understand the history of these various holidays, okay? And I've studied the history of all of them. Mother's Day and Father's Day, I think, are a little different. But when we look at Mother's Day is a holiday honoring motherhood that is observed in different forms throughout the world. Now, the American incarnation of Mother's Day was created by Anna Jarvis in 1908. Anna Jarvis in 1908. Anna Jarvis was the daughter of Anne Reeves Jarvis, who also plays into this history as well. Now, Mother's Day became an official U.S. holiday in 1914. Anna Jarvis would later denounce the holiday's commercialization and spent the latter part of her life trying to remove the holiday from the calendar. She would later in life denounce the holiday for what it became. Now, Mother's Day in the U.S. is celebrated on the second Sunday in May, and traditionally involves presenting mothers with flowers, cards, and other gifts. Okay, so we're going to deal with some of this history here of Mother's Day, and why did the woman who created Mother's Day denounce it later in life. Now, when we look at the National Retail Federation to see how much money is spent on Mother's Day. And when I want to research the spending around different holidays, I go to NRF.com, National Retail Federation. Mother's Day spending is expected to be $28.1 billion for this year, $28.1 billion. And we flip over here and look at NRF.com, National Retail Federation. Approximately 83% of U.S. adults are expected to celebrate Mother's Day. Now, let's see here. Let me back up a little bit. So 72%, top three gift categories for 2021 for Mother's Day. 72% will give greeting cards. 49% will take their mom on a special outing. 68% will give flowers. Okay. And it's expected that on average, people will spend $220.48. The year in 2021, consumers plan to spend an average of $220.48 on Mother's Day items. The figure is $16 more than they plan to spend in 2020, and the highest in the survey's history. So they've been doing this survey since I think it's 2003. They've been doing this survey, National Retail Federation. Okay, so let's look at some of the history of Mother's Day. So when we look at the origins of Mother's Day as celebrated in the United States, it dates back to the 19th century, back to the 1800s, in the years before the U.S. Civil War. Now, the Civil War is 1861 to 1865, and you have a woman named Anne Reeves Jarvis of West Virginia. And Anne Reeves Jarvis, who is the mother of Ann Jarvis, but Anne Reeves Jarvis start something called Mother's Day work clubs. Mother's Day work clubs. And these Mother's Day work clubs were designed to teach local women there in West Virginia how to properly care for their children. Now, these clubs later became a unifying force in a region of the country still divided over the Civil War. In 1868, Anne Reeves Jarvis organized Mother's Friendship Day. Mother's Friendship Day, at which mothers gathered with former Union and Confederate soldiers to promote reconciliation, because this is 1868. You still have a hatred between the North and the South. Now, this is after the Civil War has ended in 1865. This is during Reconstruction. And you still have a hatred between the North and the South. You have 4 million 4 million slaves who are going to be set free. You have land that's going to be allocated to some of these former slaves, about 40,000 families, coastal land in South Carolina, Florida, and Georgia. Okay. And that's Special Field Order number 15, commonly known as 40 Acres and a Mule. So you're going to have all this take place, and you're still going to have bad blood between the North and the South. So Mother's Friendship Day was designed for mothers to gather with former Union and Confederate soldiers to promote reconciliation. You're going to have some other women who play a role in Mother's Day becoming a holiday also. You're going to have a woman named Julia Ward Howe, Howe, Julia Ward Howe, who was an abolitionist and suffrage and fought for in the suffrage movement, fought for women to have the right to vote. And you're going to have other women as well who are going to contribute somehow to an early idea of Mother's Day. In 1870, Julia Ward Howe wrote the Mother's Day Proclamation, which was a call to action that asked mothers to unite in promoting world peace. In 1873, Julia Ward Howe campaigned for a Mother's Peace Day, to be celebrated every June 2nd. Now, then you're going to have Anna Jarvis, who is the daughter of Anne Reeves Jarvis. And Anna Jarvis would probably contribute to what we know as Mother's Day more so than anyone else. Anna Jarvis is going to continue the work of her mother, and the official Mother's Day holiday arose in the 1900s as a result of the efforts of Anna Jarvis, daughter of Anne Reeves Jarvis. Now, following her mother's death in 1905, Anna Jarvis conceived of Mother's Day as a way of honoring the sacrifices mothers made for their children. And let me see, I'm going to pull this up here. We'll pull this up. We'll look at some information from history.com, official website of the History Channel. Okay, so Anna Jarvis is going to continue the work of her mother, Anne Reeves Jarvis. And Anna Jarvis conceived of Mother's Day as a way of honoring the sacrifices mothers made for their children. So after gaining financial backing from a Philadelphia department store owner named John Wanamaker in May 1908, Anna Jarvis organized the first official Mother's Day celebration at a Methodist church in Grafton, West Virginia. Now that same day also saw thousands of people attend a Mother's Day event at one of John Wanamaker's retail stores in Philadelphia. Now, following the success of her first Mother's Day, Anna Jarvis, who remained unmarried and childless her whole life, resolved to see her holiday added to the national calendar, she argued that American holidays were biased toward male achievements. She argued that American holidays were biased toward male achievements. She started a massive letter writing campaign to newspapers and prominent politicians urging the adoption of a special day honoring motherhood. Now, by 1912, many states, towns, and churches had adopted Mother's Day as an annual holiday, and Anna Jarvis had established the Mother's Day International Association to help promote her cause. Now, her persistence paid off, and in 1914, President Woodrow Wilson signed a measure officially establishing the second Sunday in May as Mother's Day. Now, Anna Jarvis is then going to go on to denounce the commercialization of Mother's Day. She's going to denounce what Mother's Day grew into. So Anna Jarvis had originally conceived of Mother's Day as a day of personal celebration between mothers and families. Now it's Mother's Day, Mother', meaning possessive, meaning your mother. It's not Mother's Day, Mothers, meaning every mother you know. Just so people understand the concept, because that apostrophe makes a difference in the meaning. Now, Anna Jarvis' version of Mother's Day involved wearing a white carnation as a badge and visiting one's mother or attending church services with your mother. But once Mother's Day became a national holiday, it was not long before florists, card companies, Hallmark and other card making companies, and other merchants capitalized on the popularity of Mother's Day. While Anna Jarvis had initially worked with the floral industry to help raise the profile of Mother's Day. By 1920, she had become disgusted with how the holiday had been commercialized. Well, this is only 6 years because it became a national holiday in 1914 because of the white supremacist president Woodrow Wilson. So by 1920, she's fed up. Okay, she said, "Y'all gonna make me lose my mind up in here, with all this commercialization going on of Mother's Day." So Anna Jarvis outwardly denounced the transformation and urged people to stop buying Mother's Day flowers, cards, and candles. Anna Jarvis eventually resorted to an open campaign against Mother's Day profiteers, speaking out against confectioners. These are the candy makers, especially the chocolate candy makers. She spoke out against confectioners. She spoke out against the florists and even charities who were saying, donate money on Mother's Day. She denounced all of this. She also launched countless lawsuits against groups that used the name Mother's Day, eventually spending most of her personal wealth in legal fees. By the time of her death in 1948, Anna Jarvis, who created the modern day incarnation of Mother's Day, had disowned the holiday altogether. She denounced it. You remember En Vogue had a song called "Give It Up, Turn It Loose." She gave it up and turned it loose. And she even actively lobbied the government, the U.S. government, to have the holiday removed from the American calendar. See, Anna Jarvis wasn't playing. She said, "This is not what I had in mind." She said, "You've created a commercialized Frankenstein of what I envisioned to honor the sacrifices of mothers in this country." There was an article from Huffington Post um, dealing with Mother's Day. This article is from, and check out this one here from history.com, the website of the History Channel, Mother's Day 2021, dealing with Mother's Day history. There was an article from Washington Post. The founder of Mother's Day hated what the holiday became. Okay, this is from May 8th, 2014. And I cite this one sometimes because I think it's in this article, because they had quotes of what she said about these different businesses and the commercialization of Mother's Day. Let me, I'm going to pull that up. We'll bring this up on the screen share. If you have a quick question or comment, give us a call, 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. Now, I'm not against celebrating Mother's Day. I'm dealing with history. I'm a historian. I'm dealing with the history of Mother's Day and how the woman who created it became fed up with became fed up with the commercialization of Mother's Day. Okay, I'm all for it, especially I'm not against celebrating it, especially this year where we've been through so much with COVID-19 and we got rid of the traitor-in-chief, the Benedict Donald, the first Russian president of the United States. And you have 570,000 people plus who died of COVID and things like this. So I understand wanting to celebrate Mother's Day. I'm not against that, but we should understand this history also. If we look at this article here, let's bring this up. This is from HuffingtonPost.com. The founder of Mother's Day hated what the holiday became. The founder of Mother's Day hated what the holiday became. And so they talk some about the history of Anna Jarvis. But they go on to talk about a 1924 story published in the Miami Daily News and Metropolis detailed Anna Jarvis' distaste and disdain for what Mother's Day had become. She said, let's see here. She talked about consumerism. And she said commercialization of Mother's Day is growing every year. Since the movement has spread to all parts of the world, many things have tried to attach themselves because of its success. She talks about the florist. She said the red carnation has no connection with Mother's Day. The red carnation has no connection with Mother's Day, yet florists have spread the idea that it should be worn for mother who has passed away. Okay, florists, see, my background's in marketing. Okay, well, part of my background's in marketing, right? In sales, marketing. So I see how marketers become very creative. Dr. King Day sales, Flag Day sales, things like this. Okay. And Flag Day sales, when you have I have my Colin Kaepernick shirt on right now, right? So you had people when Colin Kaepernick was taking the knee, another NFL players taking the knee. They said that they were disgracing the national anthem, the white national anthem, not the black one, the white national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner, written by Francis Scott Key, a white supremacist slave owner in 1814 during the War of 1812. But they said you're disgracing the flag and disgracing the national anthem and things like this, right? But oftentimes, many white people disgrace the flag every day because based upon the U.S. flag code, based upon the U.S. flag code introduced in, I think it was 1914, the U.S. flag code. The U.S. flag code details how to handle the U.S. flag. One, it's against the U.S. flag code to have the U.S. flag in any type of advertisement, like Flag Day sales. That's against the U.S. flag code. It's against the U.S. flag code to wear the U.S. flag as part of attire, like a U.S. flag necktie. So when I fly on Southwest Airlines, oftentimes the pilots have a U.S. flag necktie. That's against the U.S. flag code. It's against the U.S. flag code to have bikinis and hats and all different types of stuff like that made out of the U.S. flag. So, you had people saying, "Oh, they're taking a knee," which actually comes from the military as a sign of respect. But they said, "Oh, they're taking a knee and they're protesting against the flag and they're protesting against the Star Spangled Banner, the national anthem." No, they weren't protesting against that. They're protesting against white supremacy, racism, and police brutality. Just like Rosa Parks, when she refused to give up her seat on that Cleveland Avenue bus, December 1st, 1955, she wasn't protesting the bus. She was protesting segregation on the bus. She was protesting policies of white supremacy and racism in the city of Montgomery, Alabama. She wasn't protesting the bus. So if we go back to Anna Jarvis, who was protesting against the holiday that she created, she said the red carnation has no connection with Mother's Day. Yet florists spread the idea that it should be worn for a mother who has passed away. This has boosted the sale of red carnations. Now, this year, there's a shortage of flowers for a number of reasons. There's a shortage of flowers. She talked about candy makers. She said candy makers are also the worst. She said confectioners put a white ribbon on a box of candy and advance the price just because it's Mother's Day. She's saying they just jack up the price because it's Mother's Day. And she said there is no connection between candy and Mother's Day. It's pure commercialization. Now, this is the woman who created Mother's Day, Anna Jarvis, who led a campaign later, actually starting about 1920, led a campaign against the holiday that she created because of the commercialization of it. She talked about greeting card makers. Now, I think every mother can sympathize with this right here. She said greeting card makers are terrible. She said, as are lazy kids who just send pre-written cards. Okay, so I think there's a whole lot of mothers who can sympathize with this. Okay, it doesn't matter what race they are. I think there's a whole lot of mothers who can sympathize with this. Anna Jarvis said the sending of a what? Now you know this is old. She didn't say sending a text message. She didn't say that this is a telegram. This is a wire, a telegram. You know this is old. Okay. She said the sending of a wire is not sufficient. Write a letter to your mother. No person is too busy to do this. Any mother would rather have a line of the worst scribble from her son or daughter than a fancy greeting card or telegram. Okay, so you know this is old, right? She's talking about telegrams, Western Union. Okay. Okay, so this is straight from Anna Jarvis, denouncing Mother's Day. So check out this article also from HuffingtonPost.com. The founder of Mother's Day hated what the holiday became. Anna Jarvis may have had the best intentions, but quickly despised her own invention. So check out that article also. All right, 313-778-7600 is the call-in number. If you have a quick question or comment, 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a quick question or comment. All right, so I'm not against, celebrating Mother's Day. And you want to go to church with your mom, you want to, even if you want to take her to dinner or something. I mean, especially after last year, I know, people who lost their mom. So, but we just have to understand the original purpose of it. Okay. Of Mother's Day. All right, I want to go to this next story here, and we're going to go to clip 1 here in just a minute, Jalen. So you have these attacks that are taking place, these culture wars, and these attacks when it comes to voter restriction bills. We're being attacked in state legislatures across the country. African Americans are under attack, Hispanics, Latinos, everybody. Okay, many people who are college age, voting, all of this is under attack. So Friday in the Texas state legislature, there was a debate that took place. It's Friday, May 7th in the Texas state legislature. And we know that there was a Texas House bill that passed. Is a restrictive, a voter restriction bill. And it was after an all-night fight where Democrats were trying to slow this bill down, take out some of the most harmful parts of the bill, etc. Okay. There was an article from NBC News. Texas House passes restrictive election bill. I'm going to pull this one up here. Texas House passes restrictive election bill after Democrats all-night fight. The Texas vote came after Florida became the latest U.S. state to enact restrictive voting laws, with Republican Governor Ron DeSantis signing the legislation on Fox News, Fox and Friends. So we talked about this last week. I think it was either Thursday's show, because we weren't on live Friday. We talked about this on Thursday's show with Florida. And I think we talked about Florida on Roland Martin Unfiltered also. Okay. Let me see something here. So we'll pull this one up. But during this debate in Texas, okay, so the GOP-controlled state House of Representatives passed election legislation Friday afternoon that adds new penalties to the voting process after Democratic lawmakers waged an all-night fight against the bill. The bill also gives partisan poll workers additional access and makes it a crime to block or obstruct their view. It passed along party lines 78-64 in the state House of Representatives. Now, Democrats were able to leverage a procedural challenge Thursday evening to secure changes to the bill, negotiating with Republicans deep into the night, and eventually hammering out 18 different amendments. Okay, so we'll talk about that some. But during this whole debate, the question came up regarding language in the bill. And this article here from the Washington Post deals with purity of the ballot box, which is language of the bill that comes from the Texas state constitution. And this goes back into the history of Texas. And this was all geared towards having all white primaries, locking African Americans out of the ability to vote in primaries in Texas. This article here from the Washington Post: a Texas bill drew ire for saying it would preserve purity of the ballot box. Here's the phrase's history. And this deals with the debate between Texas State Representative Raphael Anchia, who's a Democrat, and Representative Briscoe Cain, Republican. Briscoe Cain looks like he's about 14, 15, 16 years old. And this phrase that has a deep, deep history. Let's go to, I want to go to clip one here from the Rachel Maddow show. Rachel did a really good job of laying this history out. You're going to get commentary from me, of course. Racist relic caught creeping into new Texas voter suppression bill. Let's go to this clip, Jayla.
1918, 2 years before American women were granted the right to vote, the women of Texas were granted the right to vote in state primary elections. Didn't happen until 2 years later for the whole country, but in Texas, it happened in 1918. Here's a group of Texas women waiting to register to vote for the first time in July 1918. They're getting ready to register to vote in a Texas primary election. This is a flyer from around that time, making sure women knew they now had access to the ballot box in Texas. Women, not a great flyer, look at that. Women, the eyes of Texas are upon you. Have you paid that poll tax? Poll taxes were still a thing back then. And again, this was for voting in a primary, not in a general election, but this was Texas in 1918. And Texas, for all intents and purposes, was a one-party state. It was controlled by the Southern Democrats, a very different party from the Democratic Party as we know it today. The Southern Democrats basically won all the elections in Texas back then. So voting in the primary was basically like voting in the general. Whoever won the Southern Democrats primary was basically guaranteed to win the general election too. So it was a big deal. When Texas, ahead of the United States as a whole, Texas welcomed women to the ballot box in 1918 to vote in state primaries. Except there was a hitch, a really, really big hitch. This is Christia Adair. Back in 1918, Christia Adair was 25 years old. She was a young suffragist living in Texas when the state granted women the right to vote. And so the day of that first primary, when Texas women could turn in a ballot for the first time in the state of Texas, Christia Adair says she got dressed up to go vote. She was a voting rights advocate. She was somebody who had been agitating for women to be allowed to vote. Women can vote. She was there. When she got to the polls, she was not allowed to cast a ballot. This is Christia Adair in 1977 explaining what exactly happened to her that day. Watch this.
The white women were going to vote, and we dressed up and went to vote. When we got on there, well, we couldn't vote. They gave us all different kind of excuses why. Finally, one woman, Mrs. Simmons, said, "Are you saying that we can't vote because we are Negroes?" And he said, "Yes, Negroes don't vote in primary in Texas." So that just hurt our hearts real bad.
Okay, pause it right there. Negroes can't vote in primaries in Texas. This was 1918. We'll pick this up on the other side of the break. Listen to the African History Network show right here on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation of Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Stand by, everybody. Okay, let me see something here. Okay, how's everybody doing? We have Nicole. We have Alice. Okay, I posted a link here if you want to support the African History Network. $, the AHN show through Cash App. and also through PayPal, paypal.me/TheAHNShow. We posted the links here. We have it. So you can just click on the link. What were you saying, Alice? Okay, we have Ruby. How's everybody doing? Sherwin. You all can still register. How many of you all still have to register for the online course that I teach on Saturdays? We just had a new section that started up on Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. We'll post a link here. You can register for the class. As soon as you register, you can start watching the class we just did on Saturday, May 8th. This is a 9-week, 18-hour online course. I deal with thousands of years of history and what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Okay, stand by. We're back from break in 2 minutes. Stand by. Hell no, I'm not inviting Jesse Lee Peterson on my show, Becky. No. I've had enough of Jesse Lee Peterson. We'll play excerpts of the Tammy Mac Live show on Monday. And also, I was on the Tammy Mac Live show Monday, May 3rd. So we'll play excerpts of that show tomorrow. I was trying to edit it some and get some ready for the day, but the show's packed for the day. I don't have any more shows packed for the day. So we'll do that Monday. And then also Friday, I was on Roland Martin Unfiltered. We'll share an excerpt or two of Roland Martin Unfiltered on Monday show. No, I'm not going to have Jesse Lee Peterson.
Right. 910 AM Superstation, a division of Adele Media. The views and opinions expressed on any program are those of the producers and or the persons appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 910 AM Superstation or Adele Media.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, May 9th, 2021, and we are live. Hope everybody's doing well. Okay, so somebody just asked me, am I going to have Reverend Jesse Lee Peterson on my show? Hell no. Okay, no. For what? Why? To accomplish what? No. All right. So on tomorrow's show, so I was on the Tammy Mac Live show once again on Fox Soul. That's why, let's see, last Monday, May 3rd, we weren't on live because I had to do her show. And it was a panel discussion. So now some people, a lot of people have been commenting on it, and because other people uploaded it, and it's kind of gone viral, I guess, somewhat. My co-panelist was Dr. Umar Johnson, and it was supposed to be Nephew Tommy from the Steve Harvey Morning Show. It's supposed to be Nephew Tommy. Nephew Tommy had a last-minute scheduling conflict. So they substituted Reverend Jesse Lee Peterson, who is one of the most brain-damaged Negroes you ever want to meet in your life. They substituted Reverend Jesse Lee Peterson for Nephew Tommy. So I didn't know it was going to be Reverend Jesse Lee Peterson until I actually logged on to the Zoom. Actually logged on to the interview, and I saw the place card holder for him. So because I checked earlier in the day. And they said, okay, it's going to be 3 of you. It's supposed to be Nephew Tommy. But anyway, foxsoul.tv, you can watch the Tammy Mac Live show from May 3rd. Also, we posted on our Facebook fan page. I'm going to embed it on our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. It's on YouTube. You can just search for the Tammy Mac Live show. I think they have it at the Fox Soul TV. Actually, I'll post a link here. And it was crazy because Reverend Jesse Lee Peterson said racism doesn't exist, systemic racism doesn't exist, white supremacy doesn't exist, all this stuff. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. But anyway, okay, you can still register for the online course that I teach. We have a new section that just started up. I do it on Saturdays. Now Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. This is a 9-week, 18-hour online course. No, I am not going to have diamond and silk on this show. Look, let me explain something to you all, okay? I don't try to do stuff to go viral. I'm a historian, okay? I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't deal with brain damaged Negroes. I'm sorry. No, okay? This is not that type of show. All right. It's a 9-week, 18-hour online course where we deal with thousands of years of history and what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place, okay? So I just posted a link here, and then also you can visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have the information there as well. So we do the classes live, and then all the classes are recorded also. We do them live. There's you can watch live. There's a text chat where you can ask questions in class. You see me, I can't see you. So you can be in your pajamas. You don't have to do your hair or what have you, okay? And then all the sessions are archived as well. So you can go back and watch them over and over again. So if you go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, right on the home page, scroll down, you'll see the information for a radio show on 6 days a week. You can click here to listen to audio podcasts, click here to read articles I've written. You have information for the show here. Click here to register here. Next class is going to be Saturday, May 15th. And then click here to enroll. Class is regularly $130, on sale $80. As soon as you register, you can start watching the content. You can watch the class on Saturday, May 8th. And then I taught the class in February and March of 2021. So we have all those sessions archived, so you can watch that as well. You can watch from around the world. All right. So we'll see you in class Saturday, May 15th, 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. Okay, I want to go back to what we were discussing right before the break. This disturbing case of what happened in Texas Friday, May 7th in the state legislature in Texas. All right. And the House passed this new voter restriction bill. Okay. Now, it hasn't been signed into law yet, but the House, Texas House of Representatives passed this new voter restriction bill. And LJ, do me a favor, back up that clip about 30 seconds or 45 seconds, something like that also. We're going to go back to that. But there's a clause in this voter restriction bill that has a deep history of excluding African Americans, disenfranchising African Americans. And this clause is purity of the ballot box, purity of the ballot box. So right before the break, we were hearing about Christia Adair, who back in 1918, African-American woman, back in 1918, she was disenfranchised from voting in Texas primaries. And this purity of the ballot box that's part of the Texas state constitution was designed to have all white primaries in the state of Texas, designed to have all white primaries in the state of Texas and lock African Americans out of being able to vote. Let's go back to this clip.
Adair was 25 years old. She was a young suffragist living in Texas when the state granted women the right to vote. And so the day of that first primary, when Texas women could turn in a ballot for the first time in the state of Texas, Christia Adair said she got dressed up to go vote. She was a voting rights advocate. She was somebody who had been agitating for women to be allowed to vote. Women can vote. She was there. When she got to the polls, she was not allowed to cast a ballot. This is Christia Adair in 1977 explaining what exactly happened to her that day. Watch this.
The white women were going to vote, and we dressed up and went to vote. And when we got on there, well, we couldn't vote. They gave us all different kind of excuses why. But finally, one woman, Mrs. Simmons, said, "Are you saying that we can't vote because we are Negroes?" And he said, "Yes, Negroes don't vote in primary in Texas." So that just hurt our hearts real bad.
Negroes don't vote in the primaries in Texas. Let's throw that picture up there again. Those Texas women in their cute hats and their long skirts all registering to vote. These women, of course, are all white. Because in 1918, Texas held all white primaries. No person of color in Texas was allowed to vote or run for office in a primary election. Only white people were allowed to do that. This was post-Reconstruction America. This was the era, absolutely, of poll taxes, of literacy tests. This was Jim Crow. This was an era of white people in power using overt, unapologetic influence to prevent Black people not only from running for office, but from voting. And this is one of the ways they did it, by holding explicitly all-white primaries. They said they were protecting the purity of the ballot box. That was as far as they went in terms of code, right? Banishing Black people from the right to vote for the sake of the purity of the ballot box. That kind of language was ultimately enshrined in the Texas state constitution. Quote, in all elections by the people, the legislature shall make regulations as may be necessary to detect and punish fraud and to preserve the purity of the ballot box. The purity of the ballot box was about having all white voters in primaries, all white primaries. And all white primaries are not just a Texas thing. They happen in other states, other southern states too. But when people talk about all white primaries, they're usually remembering Texas, because Texas is where the all white primary first began to fall. In 1940, an African-American dentist named Lonnie Smith tried to vote in a primary in Houston, and he was turned away because it was an all-white primary. But then, with the help of the NAACP, Dr. Smith sued. His lawyer assigned to the case was a young lawyer, turned out to be a very talented young lawyer named Thurgood Marshall, who of course would go on to become the first Black justice on the United States Supreme Court. And that case of that Black Texas dentist, in fact, went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled 8-1 that Dr. Smith had the right to vote in the Texas primary, that the idea, this rule in Texas of an all-white election, was unconstitutional. The majority ruling, reading in part, quote, the United States is a constitutional democracy. Its organic law grants to all citizens a right to participate in the choice of elected officials without restriction by any state because of race. Constitutional rights would be of little value if they could be thus indirectly denied. The next day, April 4th, 1944, this is the headline in the New York Times. High Court rules Negroes can vote in Texas primary. Denial of right to vote because of race violates the 15th Amendment. That ruling has, this is 1944. This is not ancient history. This is 1944. And that ruling had huge implications all over the country. There were all-white primaries all over the South, but after that ruling, all-white primaries started to fall like dominoes. It was a landmark case. Thurgood Marshall called it the most important case he ever worked on. So in 1944, Dr. Lonnie Smith got his chance to vote in his Houston primary, and so did Christia Adair and all the other young women who got dressed up to vote that day in 1918 and were turned away on account of the color of their skin. All-white primaries in Texas took a long time to die, but they died. The reasoning behind them, that bogus justification to preserve the purity of the ballot box, that language about having all white electorates for Texas primaries, that sentiment still lives in the state of Texas today, in some ways. Right now, a sweeping voter suppression bill is working its way through the Texas legislature. If signed into law, the Republican-sponsored bill will radically restrict access to the ballot box in Texas in a way that all observers and experts say will disproportionately affect voters of color. And for the Texas Republicans who wrote this bill, their reason for writing it, literally what they called the stated purpose of the bill, will sound familiar. From page 1 of SB 7, the big voter suppression bill that just passed the Texas House, quote, purpose. The purpose of this act is to exercise the legislature's constitutional authority under Section 4, Article 6 of the Texas Constitution to make all laws necessary to detect and punish fraud and preserve the purity of the ballot box. Preserve the purity of the ballot box, the language from the Texas State Constitution that was put there to try to protect the Texas ideal of all white electorates, of all white voters in Texas primaries.
Okay, pause it right there, Jalen. Do me a favor, pause it right there. So what we're seeing is how those that don't understand history are destined to repeat it. And we're seeing how the laws and policies were used back in 1918 and 1940 to exclude African Americans from voting for a purpose. If our vote didn't matter, why they worked so hard to keep us from voting. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. And here we see a backlash, just as we saw in 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court cases Shelby County versus Holder, which weakened Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Here we see a backlash in state legislatures because of an overwhelming a turnout of African Americans and Hispanics and Asian Americans in the 2020 presidential election, and Democrats taking back control of the U.S. Senate and defeating Donald Trump in the White House. And we see a backlash in the state legislatures. This is what's taking place. This right here from Article 6 of the Texas State Constitution. Oh, well, I should say this is from the Senate Bill 7. This is from the bill that just passed the State House of Representatives in Texas. The purpose of this act is to exercise the legislature's constitutional authority under Section 4, Article 6, Texas Constitution. That comes from the Texas Constitution. To make all laws necessary to detect and punish fraud and preserve the purity of the ballot box. To detect and punish fraud and preserve the purity of the ballot box. So this has a history, that phrase, purity of the ballot box, as a phrase rooted in racism. Okay, let's go back to this clip, Jalen.
Institution that was put there to try to protect the Texas ideal of all white electorates, of all white voters in Texas primaries. Purpose. This year, purpose. Preserve the purity of the ballot boxes. It says in our Texas state constitution. Last night, the Republican-controlled House in Texas passed that bill restricting voting rights in the state of Texas. The vote happened in the dead of night, 3 a.m. last night. Democrats threw every legislative maneuver but the kitchen sink at that bill to try to slow it down, but it passed just after 3 a.m. One of the most striking moments of the night, though, came when a Democratic lawmaker confronted one of the sponsors of the Republican voter suppression bill, confronted him to ask him if he understood what he was doing when he and his colleagues wrote one particular clause into this bill. Watch this moment.
You chose a peculiar term in drafting this bill, and you talked about preserving the purity of the ballot box. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a quotation from the Texas Constitution, the Article 6, Section 4.
Right. And are you aware of the history behind that provision of the Constitution?
I'm not.
What was your motivation for using that term purity at the ballot box? Because that's a specific set of words that has a lot of meaning in state history.
Well,
what was your intention?
I'm going to answer for you. You know, you may have figured out by now, I really like the state constitution, and I think as a legislative body, just as Congress should, they should be looking for their authority from their charter, from the thing that gives them power. And so when we're looking at what authorizes us, right, the sovereign people of the state of Texas who delegate their authority to the Constitution, we then should look to the Constitution and say, what gives us authority to do anything on this issue? And that's the provision that does that. And so that would be why.
Did you look at the history before using that word?
No. The only thing, if we were to have a discussion, maybe over some coffee or drink some, that could go into the details of Article 1 really well. I've read the debates in the journals of the Convention of 1875 on that for that thing, but I'm not familiar with the one.
You may have missed it then, and this would have been very obvious, I think, to anybody who looked at that and looked at that language. And that provision was drafted specifically to disenfranchise black people, black voters, in fact, following the Civil War. Did you know that?
No, I'm sorry to hear that.
And
Okay.
are you familiar with white primaries?
Pause right there, Jay. Pause right there.
We've heard and read of such things. I'm glad
you read about those?
Disgusting things. Yes.
Pause right there.
Did you realize that purity of the ballot box language in the Texas Constitution gave rise to all white primaries?
No, I didn't.
And did you know that this purity at the ballot box justification was also used during the Jim Crow era to prevent black people from voting?
No, those
Jay,
are troubling things. I didn't know that was their.
Did you know that in states across the country that penal disenfranchisement schemes were put in place, including in Texas, as far back as 1845, to effectively lock African American people out of the political process? Are you aware of this history?
You know, I think we said a few times that I wasn't aware of any kind of malicious intent in the use of that term.
Okay.
And the reason it was used is I looked at the Constitution because I believe our authority is derived from the people, and that's why.
Gentlemen, sounds expired.
That young man is the guy
right
who
there,
wrote
please, Jalen.
the sweeping new voter suppression bill for the state of Texas, including its purity clause, which comes from Texas's history of all white primaries, ensuring all white electorates, segregating the electorate by race. They did struck the purity phrase from the bill late last night when they apparently learned for the first time where that came from. The heart of the bill stayed there, though, stayed intact, easily passing the Republican-controlled House.
All right. Back that up about 2 minutes, please, Jalen. Okay, so that was State Representative Briscoe Cain, who was being interrogated by State Representative Raphael Anchia. Now, Raphael Anchia was doing the right thing. He should interrogate Briscoe, okay? Because this is nonsense that's taking place. Now, here's read this article here from NPR, National Public Radio. After all-night session, Texas House approves GOP-backed voting restrictions bill, May 7th, 2021. Here's Briscoe Cain. Looks like he's about 15, 16 years old. Okay. And he likes the, so you listen to him. He said, you could tell I really like the Texas state constitution, but you're ignorant of history, Briscoe. You're ignorant of history of racism and the Jim Crow era tactics that were used to keep African Americans from voting. That's part of that state constitution that you like so much. All right, we're coming up. We're up against a break. We're going to continue this on the other side of the break and talk about purity of the ballot box and its history of racism in Texas, designed to keep African Americans from voting. You listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation of Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Are you looking for a great...
Stand by. Stand by. All right, stand by, everybody. We'll be back from break in a few minutes. Okay, we got Becky, we have Nicole, Sean. How's everybody doing? Okay, stand by, everybody. Stand by, back from break in 3 minutes. Okay, stand by. Back from break in 2 minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation of Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, May 9th, 2021, and we're live. Hope everybody's doing well. So right before the break, we were talking about what took place in the Texas State Legislature on Friday, May 7th. This new Texas voter restriction bill. There was hours of debate into the wee morning. Democrats fought. The Democrats are in the minority in the Texas State Legislature. Democrats fought to eventually remove some of the most harmful effects of the bill, eventually hammering out 18 different amendments after negotiating with Republicans. But there was a portion of the bill, there was a phrase in the bill that has a history of racism against African Americans and a history of disenfranchising African Americans in Texas. And this phrase comes from the Texas State Constitution. It's called purity of the ballot box, purity of the ballot box. And this ties into the all white primaries that took place in Texas history, like in 1918, the all white primaries that excluded African Americans from voting in the primaries in Texas. If we look at this article here from the Washington Post, a Texas bill drew ire for saying it would preserve purity of the ballot box. Here's the phrase's history. It talks about, it says the word purity has a long and racist legacy in the South, historians said. Quote, purity of the ballot box, end quote, is more obscure. Several scholars said they were not aware of it being used for discrimination, and it was enshrined in the Texas State Constitution in 1876. So this is the tail end of Reconstruction, which ends in 1877 with the Compromise of 1877, following the 1876 presidential election between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel J. Tilden. Okay. Now, this did not bar Black people from voting. Okay. It was enshrined in Texas Constitution of 1876, which did not bar Black people from voting. To others, though, it conjures century-old justifications for excluding Black voters and rules that disproportionately kept minorities from casting ballots. Now, Nina Perales, Vice President of Litigation with the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, told the Washington Post, quote, this phrase in a modern bill is racism's calling card. This phrase in a modern bill is racism's calling card. Now, appeals to purity of the ballot help deprive African Americans in Texas of their right to vote around the turn of the 20th century, said Greg Cantrell, a history professor at Texas Christian University. Jim Crow laws codifying racial segregation took hold in Texas around the same time in the 1890s and 1900s. Okay, let's go back to this clip, Jalen.
But advises Congress should. They should be looking for their authority from their charter, from the thing that gives them power. And so when we're looking at what authorizes us, the sovereign people of the state of Texas who delegated their authority through the Constitution, we then should look to the Constitution and say, what gives us authority to do anything on this issue? And that's the provision that does that. And so that would be why.
Did you look at the history before using that word?
No. The only thing, if we were to have a discussion, maybe over some coffee or drink something, I could go into the details of Article 1 really well. I've read the debates in the journals of the Convention of 1875 on that for that thing, but I'm not familiar with the one.
You may have missed it then, and this would have been very obvious, I think, to anybody who looked at that and looked at that language. And that provision was drafted specifically to disenfranchise black people, black voters, in fact, following the Civil War. Did you know that?
No, I'm sorry to hear that.
And are you familiar with white primaries?
We've heard and read of such things.
Have you read about those?
Disgusting thing, yes.
Did you realize that purity of the ballot box language in the Texas Constitution gave rise to all white primaries?
No, I didn't.
And did you know that this purity at the ballot box justification was also used during the Jim Crow era to prevent black people from voting?
No, those are troubling things. I didn't know that was their
Did you know that in states across the country that penal disenfranchisement schemes were put in place, including in Texas, as far back as 1845, to effectively lock African American people out of the political process? Are you aware of this history?
I think we said a few times that I wasn't aware of any kind of malicious intent use of that term.
Okay.
And the reason it was used is I looked at the Constitution because I believe our authority is derived from the people, and that's the gentleman's time to expire.
That young man is the guy who wrote the sweeping new voter suppression bill for the state of Texas, including its purity clause, which comes from Texas's history of all white primaries, ensuring all white electorates, segregating the electorate by race. They did struck the purity phrase from the bill late last night when they apparently learned for the first time where that came from. The heart of the bill stayed there, though, stayed intact, easily passing the Republican-controlled House.
Did the clip stop?
Yes.
Oh, okay, stop. Okay. All right. So up on the screen here we have, this is Briscoe Cain, who basically wrote the majority of that bill. Texas State Republican in the House of Representatives, Briscoe Cain. He was the one who was ignorant of the history of the phrase purity of the ballot box that's in the Texas state constitution going back to 1876. He looks like he's 15, 16 years old, but he is writing policy that impacts basically everybody there in Texas. This is an example of how elections have consequences. You look at the article here from NPR, National Public Radio. After all-night session, Texas House approves GOP-backed voting restrictions bill. This is the backlash. This is the white backlash that always comes after there is a period of time of advancement that African Americans make. This is the white backlash. And they fight back, normally not in the streets, they fight back in the state legislatures. They fight back with the laws, they fight back with the policies to attack us. This is what this is. I'm going to go back to this article here from Washington Post here in just a minute, because it has a lot of history in this article from the Washington Post. But let's go to the phone lines. Let's go to line one. Let's go to Marathon quickly. Line one, Marathon, thanks for holding. Tell us where you're calling from.
I'm calling from Detroit. I was looking at on the news and the two firefighters.
Turn down. You have the radio on. Is the radio on the back or something? I'm getting some background noise.
Wait a minute, let me see.
Whatever's noise in the background, turn that down as we can hear.
Okay, what about now?
Okay, go ahead quickly because we have a lot to cover tonight.
I was looking at the news and they had two firefighters driving trucks drunk on the news in Detroit.
Okay. All right, we'll check that out. Thanks for calling, Mary.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Okay, thanks. All right. I want to go back to this article here. This is written by Hannah Knowles, or Knowles, for Washington Post. So the word purity has a long and racist legacy in the South. Historians said purity of the ballot box is more obscure. Several scholars said they were not aware of it being used for discrimination, and it was enshrined in the Texas Constitution of 1876, which did not bar Black people from voting. To others, though, it conjures century-old justifications for excluding Black voters and rules that have disproportionately kept minorities from the ballot box. Now, let's see. It was okay. It was a word choice loaded with history. The Democratic lawmaker said Thursday a phrase that fueled all white primaries during the era of Jim Crow laws and justified the disenfranchisement of people deemed unfit to vote. The bill's language got to the heart of Democrats' criticisms. Whatever Republicans said about their intentions, this bill was the latest in a long tradition of keeping people of color from the voting polls. All right, now further down in the article, it goes on to say, now some politicians, Greg Cantrell, history professor at Texas Christian University, some politicians began to appeal to the poorer white voters who once shared political ground with African Americans in the Republican Party associated with emancipation. They tried to lure these white voters back to a Democratic Party that would be a white man's private club, Greg Cantrell said. Now, Democratic primaries became all white in Texas, first at the local level, then at the statewide level. Okay, Democratic primaries, and Democratic not meaning political party, but Democratic primaries became all white in Texas, first at the local level and then statewide. I don't think they mean political party, I think they just mean primaries. And voter participation plummeted among Black people in particular as a poll tax touted as a way to, quote, purify the ballot. A poll tax as a way to purify the ballot reserved voting for those who could afford an annual fee, Greg Cantrell said. Now, arguments that were made about criminals being ineligible to vote morphed into other groups not being eligible to vote, said Brandon Rottinghaus, a political science professor at the University of Houston. He said these ideas led to discriminatory policies like literacy tests. So right after the 15th Amendment is ratified and adopted, February of 1870. Okay, right after the 15th Amendment is ratified and adopted, then you're going to see these efforts to try to put in place laws in various states that state that if you are convicted of a felony, then you lose your right to vote. This is felony disenfranchisement. Okay, felony disenfranchisement. And the state of Alabama has one of the highest felony disenfranchisement rates still in the country. Okay, but this is going to be a tool used because 1870, the 15th Amendment, it guaranteed the right to vote for African American men, but not women. Okay, so you're going to see this creep into these laws being passed in various southern states right after the 15th Amendment is ratified. Now, let me go back to this article here. Now, Greg Cantrell said a key part of the pitch to poor white voters was, in essence, quote, "We'll make sure that you are never considered the equal of a black man again." End quote. "We'll make sure that you are never considered the equal of a black man again." Now, politicians invoked fraud to criticizing black voters as easy to manipulate, subject to the will of their ex-slave holder landlords. The promise, he said, was, quote, "We will purify the ballot. We will purify the ballot, making sure that they are never able to buy or steal black votes again." Now, if you look at the movie, if you fast forward to the movie The Birth of a Nation, that debuted February 8th, 1915. And in the movie The Birth of a Nation, now this is the 50th anniversary of the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. We'll talk about the 13th Amendment here in just a minute when we switch over, and I'm going to play an excerpt of the interview I did with Dr. Daryl Scott, history professor at Howard University. And we'll play some more we'll play some different excerpts of that interview throughout the week. Here you have the purity of the ballot box, and you have an effort to break up an alliance between poor white people and poor African Americans and former slaves. And you have an effort from the Democratic Party at this time. This is long before the Lily White movement in 1928, which was a movement in the Republican Party to push African Americans out of the Republican Party and ignore our needs, ignore our issues, our concerns, ignore the rise of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s. That's the Lily White movement in 1928, which is why African Americans left the Republican Party and went to the Democratic Party. Very few people talk about the Lily White movement in 1928. They think African Americans switched over to the Democratic Party because of the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65. No, you got to go 40 years before that. You go to the late 1920s and the effort by Republicans to get Herbert Hoover elected in the 1928 presidential election. So what they did was the Republicans appealed to Southern segregationist Democrats in 5 former Confederate states to win their vote, to get these Southern segregationist Democrats to vote for Herbert Hoover in the 1928 presidential election. Herbert Hoover was running against a moderate Democrat from New York named Al Smith. Herbert Hoover wins. And part of the platform that he ran on was ignoring the needs of African Americans. And then because of the stock market crash of October 29th, 1929, leading to the Great Depression and Herbert Hoover mishandling the Great Depression, he's defeated by Franklin Roosevelt in the 1932 presidential election. And you're going to have, because of the 1928 presidential election, you're going to have African Americans start slowly going over to the Democratic Party because we found them to be more receptive to our needs and concerns, and we were being increasingly ignored by the Republican Party. All right, so let me go back to this one here. So arguments for ballot purity took aim at other races as well. Perales said, this was, who was this? Nina Perales, okay? Nina Perales. Arguments for ballot purity took aim at other races as well. And she testified last month before the Texas House elections. Okay, so that was April 2021. She testified April 2021 before the Texas House Elections Committee. She pointed to the Ballot Purification League, the Ballot Purification League. Now, this is not to be confused with the Justice League for America. And this should not be confused with the White Citizens Council that starts in 1954 Mississippi as a direct backlash to the Brown versus Board of Education desegregation case. This is the Ballot Purification League. The Ballot Purification League in Texas sought to ban almost any form of voter assistance in the early 1900s in the name of stamping out fraud. Voter assistance, you mean like giving food to people standing in line and giving water to people standing in line? To anybody standing in line, you don't ask them who you're voting for. It is, you mean like giving food and water to anybody standing in line? Voter assistance? The Ballot Purification League. Now, proponents largely blamed Mexican voters, with state lawmaker Joseph Boehmer, Boehmer, I think it's Boehmer, announcing, state lawmaker Boehmer announcing his intent to, quote, disqualify the Mexicans of the Western and Lower Rio Grande counties. The governor eventually vetoed the measure. Historian Evan Anders recounts, quote, on the grounds that it would purge thousands of honest citizens from the political process. Did he want to disqualify the Mexicans because he said they were rapists and murderers? Is that why he would? Did he say I want to disqualify the Mexicans because they're sending rapists and murderers over here? Is that why he wanted to disqualify them? The goal of ballot purity accompanied efforts at voter suppression beyond Texas. In Alabama, for instance, Democrats' slogan for a 1901 convention to revise voting laws was, quote, white supremacy and pure elections. Historian Michael Perman recounted in his book, Struggle for Mastery, that in Alabama, in 1901, Democrats' slogan for a 1901 convention to revise voting laws, their slogan was white supremacy and pure elections. Today, that party is the Republican Party, the white nationalist party, as my friend Dr. Greg Carr of Howard University refers to them. The white nationalist party, the party of white supremacy, the Republican Party. Then there is the purity of the ballot box, quote unquote, purity of the ballot box, an argument for taking away the right to vote when someone is convicted of a felony disenfranchisement. Those policies have disproportionately affected African Americans. More than 1 in 7 African Americans are disenfranchised in 6 southern states and Wyoming, according to the Sentencing Project, a nonprofit organization focused on criminal justice reform. Okay, more than 1 in 7 African Americans are disenfranchised in southern states like Alabama, southern states, and Wyoming, according to the Sentencing Project, a nonprofit organization focused on criminal justice reform. Now, there's an article from the Brennan Center for Justice, and we may talk about this some more. They have a report here. Brennan Center. All this ties into history, okay? And people use their history and culture to fight for scarce wealth, power, and resources. People's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past, in the present, and the future to meet the needs of the community. And African history and culture gives us our foundation. It gives us our VIPs, our values, our interests, and our principles. This influences our economic empowerment, our political empowerment. It gives us our self-esteem, our self-development, our self-worth. It gives us a cultural paradigm that we see reality through. If we look quickly here at the Brennan Center for Justice, they have a report here, Racism and Felony Disenfranchisement in Intertwined History. Racism and felony disenfranchisement in intertwined history. It was not until the end of the Civil War and the expansion of suffrage to African American men that felony disenfranchisement became a significant barrier to U.S. ballots. See, as long as white people are doing this stuff is right. When we start doing it, all of a sudden it changes. This is one of the reasons. This is why marijuana was made illegal in 1937. Harry J. Anslinger, okay, white supremacist Harry J. Anslinger testified in front of Congress. He said that marijuana is used by jazz singers and Filipinos and Negroes and Mexicans. And he said white people, he said white women crave black men sexually when they're high on marijuana. This is what Harry J. Anslinger testified to in front of the U.S. Congress. This is the same Harry J. Anslinger who persecuted and antagonized Billie Holiday, which led up to her death, and took her off of methadone when she's in the hospital suffering from withdrawals from heroin addiction. This is that same white supremacist Harry J. Anslinger, who was the first chair of the Federal National Bureau of Narcotics. Harry J. Anslinger. Look him up. The United States stands alone among modern demographics in stripping voting rights from millions of citizens on the basis of criminal convictions. Across the country, states impose varying felony disenfranchisement policies. Across the country, states impose varying felony disenfranchisement policies, preventing an estimated 6.1 million Americans from casting ballots. To give a sense of scope, this population is larger than the voting eligible population of New Jersey, and of this total, nearly 4.7 million are people living in our communities, working, paying taxes, and raising families, all while barred from joining their neighbors at the voting polls. The widespread disenfranchisement disproportionately impacts people of color. 1 in every 13 voting age African Americans cannot vote, a disenfranchisement rate more than 4 times greater than that for all Americans. In four states, more than 1 in 5 African American adults are denied their right to vote. Although the data on Latino disenfranchisement is less comprehensive, a 2003 study of 10 states ranging in size from California to Nebraska found that 9 of those states, quote, disenfranchised the Latino community at rates greater than the general population, end quote. It wasn't until the end of the U.S. Civil War and the expansion of suffrage to African American men that felony disenfranchisement became a significant barrier to U.S. ballot box. At that point, 2 interconnected trends combined to make disenfranchisement a major obstacle for newly enfranchised African Americans. First, lawmakers, especially in the South, implemented a slew of criminal laws designed to target African Americans. And nearly simultaneously, many states enacted broad disenfranchisement laws that revoked voting rights from anyone convicted of any felony. These 2 trends laid the foundation for the form of mass disenfranchisement seen in this country today. Read the rest of this here from the Brennan Center for Justice, Racism, and Felony Disenfranchisement in Intertwined History. We'll probably talk some more about this on our show Monday. I want to go to this clip. We're going to go to clip 2, Jalen. I want to go to this clip here. I interviewed Dr. Daryl Scott, history professor at Howard University, interviewed him on Thursday, May 6th. And we talked about the myth that the 13th Amendment of 1865, there's a loophole that re-enslaved African Americans, and this led to mass incarceration. And this was the premise of the documentary 13th from Ava DuVernay that came out in 2016, I think it was. Okay, here's an excerpt of that interview. Let's go to this clip, Jay. I wanted to have this conversation because this evolved out of the dinner that we had back in February 2020. And you and I had a conversation during dinner and we discussed the myth of the 13th Amendment of 1865, ratified December 6, 1865, to the U.S. Constitution, and the myth that the 13th Amendment re-enslaved the former slaves, okay? He talked about the documentary 13th by Ava DuVernay, and I remember when I saw the documentary twice, and when I saw the documentary, right around that time, I was doing research on a lecture dealing with the history of the war on drugs, and I had done research on the war on drugs before, and when I dealt with when I was doing this research, I kept coming up with this same question over and over again. Now, I heard people say the 13th Amendment re-enslaved Black people, and it said that they were free unless duly convicted of a crime. And I'm going to pull up the actual text of the 13th Amendment here in just a second. And the question, when I go through and study the chronology of the history from 1865 to the beginning of the war on drugs, June 17th, 1971, under Richard Nixon, that's 106 years. I kept coming back to the same question. If the 13th Amendment was created to re-enslave us and it created mass incarceration, why did it take 106 years for mass incarceration to start?
Exactly.
I kept coming back to that same question over and over again.
Huge question. And you would think, no, I started teaching a course around this. And one of the impressions that the movie creates, and again, this doesn't start with the documentary. Correct. One of the impressions that the documentary creates is that everybody's re-enslaved. Now, my students come to class thinking, because they've all seen the documentary. Right. They come to class thinking that by 1870, 1880, the way they roll this out, that most of the ex-slaves had been re-enslaved. Okay, and some of them go as high as 90%, thinking that 90% of them had been re-enslaved. Wow. And that's the impression that is created when you say that slavery didn't end, it evolved. So the reality, when you look at the reality, is that in the late 19th century, never 1% of the free people were re-enslaved. Never 1%. It was more like 0.25%. Okay, so it's never re-enslavement at all. The number is so out of sync that is the biggest misimpression. And so when you start teaching about the 13th Amendment and incarceration, the first thing that pops is that they have to confront the fact that 99% of their ancestors in the late 19th century were never incarcerated.
Okay.
All right, pause it right there, Jalen. Pause it right there.
Yep. Even though we disproportionately in many states, but disproportionately take up a percentage of the incarceration rate, the majority of us were not incarcerated.
Now, here is the truest statement of all.
Okay,
let's put this out here, because, some people get confused and start thinking, if I disagree.
Okay, all right. Those watching on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, and my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. Keep watching. We're going to keep broadcasting for a few more minutes. We're out of time here on 910 AM, the Superstation WFDF. We'll be back tomorrow. We're Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time. Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Be sure to register for my online course, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school, at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Remember, right now it's correct. Wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you tomorrow night. Peace. All right, stand by, everybody. Okay, I'm gonna play a little bit more of this clip here. We'll talk very briefly about Cinco de Mayo, and we'll talk more about Cinco de Mayo probably on the Monday show, because we ran out of time here. So I want to go back to this clip. I did a 2-hour plus interview with Dr. Daryl Scott. We dealt with this topic, dealing with the 13th Amendment.
and and we dealt with the origins of this myth also. Okay, it's just straight up nonsense. We dealt with the origins of this myth, and then we also talked about the 1619 project and some flaws in the 1619 project as well, from the New York Times. This wasn't an attack on the 1619 project, but there are some flaws with it, and we dealt with that as well in the interview. Okay, I want to go back to, let me cue this back up here. Okay, just a second here. Let me cue this up where we left off. Okay, let's go.
Some of them go as high as 90%, thinking that 90% of them had been re-enslaved. Okay,
Wow.
so that's the impression that is created when you say that slavery didn't end, it evolved. But with the reality, when you look at the reality, is that in the late 19th century, never 1% of the free people were re-enslaved. Never 1%. It was more like 0.25%. Okay, so it's never re-enslavement at all. The number is so out of sync that is the biggest misimpression. And so when you start teaching about the 13th Amendment and incarceration, the first thing that pops is that they have to confront the fact that 99% of their ancestors in the late 19th century were never incarcerated.
Okay.
Okay. So,
yep. Even though we disproportionately in many states, even though we were disproportionately made up a percentage of the incarceration rate, but the majority of us were not incarcerated.
Now, here is the truest statement of all.
Okay,
and let's get this out here, because some people get confused and start thinking, if I disagree with this, I must be politically a conservative.
Okay.
Look, I just believe the truth may not set you free, but a lie certainly won't. All right. Now, when you start going back and looking at incarceration rates, Black people have always been disproportionately incarcerated.
Right.
So the meaning of racism, the import of racism and incarceration is that Black people are always disproportionately incarcerated. So when the prisons start developing in the early 19th century, we're always there disproportionately. Now, some of the 13thers would like to say, well, the prisons were made for white folks. Yeah, they were. But they did just fine for Black folks, if you will. So that, for instance, in New York State, Black people were something like 2% of the population in the antebellum period. Black women were 40% of the incarcerated people.
Right.
Okay, 40%. So 2% of the population produced 40% of the female prisoners. So that tells you that is mad disproportionate incarceration. Now, this is before the 13th Amendment. And who were these people? These were free Black people. And so the state of freedom for Black people has always been one of disproportionate incarceration.
Right.
Nothing to do with the 13th. Before the 13th, we're disproportionately incarcerated. After the 13th, we're disproportionately incarcerated. But never were we mass incarcerated in the 19th century. And the term mass does not even come into the conversation until the late 20th century. And when people create language, they typically create language for a purpose. Okay, they don't just come up with it for no reason. They typically are trying to make sense of something. And what everyone was trying to make sense of by the 1970s was the fact that incarceration was getting out of control. And so we went from being disproportionately incarcerated in a society where roughly 200,000 people were being incarcerated to being disproportionately incarcerated in a system of mass incarceration, so that we were 6 or 7 times more likely to be incarcerated, and over 1 million of us incarcerated, okay? And that number approaching 1.5% incarcerated in the federal pens. I mean, I'm only talking about the federal system, okay? And disproportionately incarcerated in that system. So the history is one of consistent, disproportionate incarceration. And why? Because of racism.
Right.
Now, why anybody hauls the 13th Amendment into this conversation, I don't know. I mean, but it's like, I know why. And I say why, because it's a wonderful conspiracy theory.
Right. So let me do this. Let me pull up, I have the text of the 13th Amendment here. And I encourage people to go to archives.gov, which is the official website of the National Archives, archives.gov. You can also go to loc.gov, which is the Library of Congress website, loc.gov. And you can read the entire U.S. Constitution. You can read the 13th Amendment. You can read all the amendments, the 27 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. So I'm going to pull this down also, the Chiron down there. So if we look at the 13th Amendment, the 13th Amendment is 2 sections. First section, section 1, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Okay, so people focus in on the party shall, or whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, and they focus on that and say that's a loophole. They say it's a loophole. Okay, I've heard well-known African American historians say this, highly respected African American historians, African Senate historians, I've heard say this. Okay, section 2, some friends of mine, okay, I've heard say this.
A lot of my friends, I got some former students out here saying this.
Yep. Now, section 2 says Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. Okay. Now, the 13th Amendment was passed by Congress January 31st, 1865. It was ratified December 6, 1865, and adopted December 18th, 1865. Okay. Now, Dr. Daryl Scott, when I had a conversation with you and historian Jamon Jordan, we would talk, man, we talked for 2 hours at dinner.
Yeah.
You talked about the Northwest Ordinance of 1787.
Right.
And how that's crucial to understanding the 13th Amendment of 1865. Could you explain the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, please?
Yeah, but let me first say something.
Okay, go ahead.
This clause is dealing with 2 kinds. Let's talk about 2 kinds of slavery.
Okay.
And let's just look at the language for a second.
Okay.
All right. Involuntary servitude. I have not found in any document the phrase involuntary servitude prior to 1785, when Thomas Jefferson and a committee used the phrase to talk about Western expansion in general. That bill did not pass. 2 years later, the Northwest Ordinance passed, but it has this phrase involuntary servitude, and it also has the phrase slavery, except as punishment for a crime. Now, one thing I want to say is, let's talk about 2 different kinds of slavery.
Okay.
Let's talk about chattel slavery, and let's talk about slavery, convict slavery. Okay? Now, chattel slavery is when you become property and you are owned for your life, and it is intergenerational, which means your status gets passed on through your mother to your children. Okay? So that's intergenerational chattel slavery, when you're treated like personal property. Convict slavery is when you are a convict. The state has the claim, the right, and the power to take your labor without compensation, but it's typically for a term. Typically for a term. Now, why is there redundancy in this clause?
I'm gonna pause it right there. You can we'll share some more of this interview on tomorrow's show. I'm gonna post the link here. You can watch it in its entirety. We have it on YouTube. We air this interview throughout the day. It's on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep. You probably won't see this type of information many other places. 13th from Ava DuVernay gets this wrong about slavery and mass incarceration. Dr. Daryl Scott and Michael Imhotep. So check out that. We just posted the link there. You can watch the interview in its entirety. It's like about 2 hours and 12 minutes. We got into some really deep history and dealing with the laws pertaining to enslaved Africans, things like that. All right. If you like this type of information, also you can support the African History Network, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, and also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show, paypal.me/the AHN Show, or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. This helps us keep doing the research. We're on the air 6 days a week. This helps us to keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay some of the bills, etc. All right. I want to go quickly here to this last story, and we'll talk some more about this next couple of days. So this past week was Cinco de Mayo. It was Wednesday, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo. Okay. There was an article from Axios.com that deals with the forgotten anti-slavery history of Cinco de Mayo, the forgotten anti-slavery history of Cinco de Mayo. Okay, so we're going to look at this here quickly. And contrary to popular belief, Cinco de Mayo is not Mexico's Independence Day. Cinco de Mayo refers to a battle that took place May 5th, 1862, the Battle of Puebla, between during the Franco-Mexican War. It was between the Mexican army and the French army. And if we look quickly here at Cinco de Mayo history, it was the Battle of Puebla. The French army outnumbered the Mexican army. Okay, it was about 6,000 French troops to 2,000 loyal Mexican troops, and the Mexican army was able to the vastly outnumbered and poorly supplied Mexicans, led by Texas General Ignacio Zaragoza, fortified the town of Puebla and prepared for the French assault on May 5th, 1862. The army gathered, supported by heavy military, before the city of Puebla and led an assault. The French army led an assault. The battle lasted from daybreak to early evening, and when the French finally retreated, they had lost nearly 500 soldiers. Fewer than 100 Mexicans had been killed in the clash. Although not a major strategic win in the overall war against the French, Zaragoza's success at the Battle of Puebla on May 5th, 1862 represented a great symbolic victory for the Mexican government and bolstered the resistance movement. In 1867, thanks in part to military support and political pressure from the United States, which was finally in a position to aid its besieged neighbor, Mexico, after the end of the Civil War, France finally withdrew. Okay. If we look at this quickly here from Axios, Cinco de Mayo is marketed in the U.S. Let me pull this up here. Cinco de Mayo is marketed in the U.S. as a fun holiday for getting drunk and eating tacos, but its origins are linked to California Latinos who saw a battle in Mexico in 1862 as a victory for abolition during the Civil War. Okay, now protests around the death of George Floyd, which brought Latino and African American advocates together over the past year, have prompted a re-examination
of this lesser known piece of U.S. history. So Cinco de Mayo commemorates the Battle of Puebla, as I just said, and the victory of Mexico's ragtag army, made up largely of indigenous soldiers, against the better equipped and trained French forces of Napoleon III. Spanish language newspapers at the time showed Latinos in California were worried about Napoleon III's interests in helping the Confederacy, and they saw the win as a victory against slavery. Okay, they saw the win against the French army as a victory against slavery. Now, the diverse coalition of Latinos from Mexico, Central America, and South America had been brought to California because of the gold rush, the 1849 gold rush, because of the gold rush, and were outspoken anti-slavery advocates. It's important to note that Mexico had abolished slavery about 1829, and Vicente Guerrero is going to be the second president of Mexico, and he was a former slave. He's of African ancestry. He was a former slave, and he's going to abolish slavery. And this is then going to lead to a Southern Underground Railroad, where you have, this is going to lead to a Southern Underground Railroad where you have runaway slaves running into Texas, okay? Because I'm sorry, running into Mexico, running from Texas into Mexico, okay? There was an article from face-to-faceafrica.com that deals with Vicente Guerrero. I did a presentation on this a couple years ago. I have to pull that out and rebroadcast that. The first Black president of Mexico whose execution shocked the nation. The first Black president of Mexico whose execution shocked the nation. This talks about Vicente Guerrero. He campaigned for president in 1828 of Mexico. Sources say he had to fight the lighter-skinned Mexican elite that was bent on maintaining a system of white supremacy in Mexico. Even before he could abolish slavery, he had to face a Spanish invasion. There was another hurdle. Despite helping Mexico fight against Spain for independence in the early 19th century, Vicente Guerrero had to deal with some influential Mexicans who looked down on him for having Afro-Indio roots and for being a mule driver by trade. A descendant of the approximately 250,000 enslaved Africans brought to Mexico during colonial times, Vicente Guerrero was born on August 9th, 1783 in Tixla, now the state of Guerrero in Mexico, to a humble family. Okay, read the rest of this article here. They talk about Afro-Mexicans. It is recorded that in the 16th century, New Spain had the largest number. New Spain is what Mexico was called at one point. Because they were conquered by the Spanish. New Spain had the largest number of African slaves of all the Americas at one point. A 1595 census showed that Afro-Mexicans outnumbered Spanish and mestizos, persons of indigenous and Spanish mixed descent, in urban towns. By 1646, the numbers had increased to 116,529 for Afro-Mexicans and 35,089 for Africans. Okay, read the rest of this article here. The first Black president of Mexico whose execution shocked the nation. This is the story of Vicente Guerrero, who was of African descent and the second president of Mexico.
Okay. All right. Now, let's go back quickly to the article from Axios. All right, so the diverse coalition of Latinos from Mexico, Central America, and South America have been brought to California because of the gold rush and were outspoken anti-slavery advocates, anti-slavery advocates. David Hayes Batista, author of El Cinco de Mayo, An American Tradition, said for years Latinos celebrated. Let's see here. Let's go over here. He said for years, Latinos celebrated the holiday with parades of people dressed in Civil War uniforms and gave speeches about how the Battle of Puebla was part of a larger struggle for abolition. Now, the Mexican Revolution in the 1910s sparked a new wave of migration to the United States, and Cinco de Mayo's abolitionist connections faded. Mexican Americans used the holiday as a David versus Goliath story of indigenous people beating a European force as inspiration for fighting for civil rights. By the 1980s, corporations and beer companies had co-opted the day as a way to reach the growing U.S. Latino or Hispanic market. Boxing promoters also used the weekend near Cinco de Mayo to host big fights featuring popular Latino boxers of the moment. Okay, now Cinco de Mayo is not Mexico's Independence Day. Mexico's Independence Day is on September 16th, because some people still think that's Mexico's Independence Day. All right. Okay. So check out this article here from Axios.com, The Forgotten Anti-Slavery History of Cinco de Mayo by Russell Contreras for Axios.com. Okay, everybody be sure to register for the online course that I teach on Saturdays. This one here is on Saturdays because a lot of people said when I was teaching it on Tuesdays, they said they couldn't do it on Tuesdays. So this one is Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay, so we deal with thousands of years of history and what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. And we have the flyer here also at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. It's right on the homepage. Next class is Saturday, May 15th, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You go to our website, click right here to register here. It takes you to the next page. You can click here to enroll. The course is on sale, $80, regularly $130. All the sessions are archived, so you can go back and watch them over and over again, anything you missed. And we do the classes live on Saturdays. There's a text chat, so you can ask questions in the class. And then all the sessions are archived also, okay? So we deal with thousands of years of history and what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. We also deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, and how the teachings that the Moors taken to Europe from the Nile Valley region of Africa, how this brings Europe out of the Dark Ages. And we deal with what leads to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Okay, so this is a 9-week online course. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So as soon as you register, you can watch the class from this past Saturday. And I also taught the class in February and March. So we have that whole session. It's like 10 installments there. You can watch those also, okay? And you can watch from around the world. Even after the course ends, you still have access to the course you registered for. You can still watch it. All right, we have to get out of here. Remember, the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. And we'll talk to you tomorrow. Peace.